There's a picture.
On the morning of the 13th of May 1568, Mary, Queen of Scots, stood here and looked to the north. She may also have looked for hope, because just about a mile in that direction, at the edge of what is now Queen's Park, a battle was taking place, and it was not going her way. For Mary, this was the beginning of the end.
Mary had escaped from Lochleven Castle just 11 days before. She had been held prisoner for about 10 months, during which time Scotland was governed by her half-brother James Stuart, the Earl of Moray, otherwise known as Regent Moray. There were a number of events and circumstances in Mary's short life that eventually led to her forced abdication and imprisonment. But at the core of the whole sorry tragedy was her misfortune to be a Roman Catholic during the Protestant Reformation. After escaping from Lochleven Castle, Mary arrived at Hamilton Castle, and by the 13th of May had gathered many supporters willing to fight for their queen. Her army numbered some 6,000 men. In order to bolster this number and establish a secure base from which to retake the throne, she decided to make for Dumbarton Castle. She placed Archibald Campbell, the Earl of Argyll, in charge of her army. With standards unfurled and banners flying, they set out on the road to Dumbarton. Regent Moray got wind of Mary's plans. He hastily assembled an army of some 4,000 men, and while initially unsure which route Mary would take, did eventually gather his forces on Langside Hill, now part of Queen's Park, and in the village of Langside.
Mary's army made their way along what was called the Bussanake Road. It's now Battlefield Road. And when they found their way blocked by the forces of the Regent Moray, they made their way up onto Clincart Hill, which is really just that slight rise sitting just behind me, more or less between the Battlefield Rest and Mount Florida railway station.
So at this stage you had the two armies facing each other, each from their own little hill. Artillery rounds were fired from both sides, but at the end of the day someone had to make a move. It was a 2,000 strong unit of Hamiltons, led by Lord Claude Hamilton, who moved first, for the Queen, towards the village of Langside.
That's Algie Street there, running along the right hand side of the garage, between the garage and the church. And if you look at mid-19th century Ordnance Survey maps, you will see that street, and it's lined with cottages with gardens. And in addition to smaller thoroughfares, there's a longer street that used to run between the monument and the battlefield rest, and it was called the Lang Lone. And this was all part of the village of Langside, absolutely nothing of which remains. And Regent Moray placed 200 hagbutters, infantry carrying handheld firearms, guns, in the gardens of that village, hidden and ready to fire.
This image shows the Battle of Carberry Hill some 11 months earlier, during which no fighting actually took place and Mary was captured, then imprisoned in Lochleven Castle. But it gives a good idea of how battles of the period looked. You can see pike formations, each containing up to 100 men. You can see artillery, cavalry, and men with handheld firearms. For at this period in history, guns were pretty well established on the battlefield. You can see most of the soldiers wearing steel breastplates and helms. Knights in armour still existed, but their days were numbered. The addition of firearms to the pike squares turned a defensive unit into an offensive unit that was practically impossible for cavalry to deal with, as we may see in this image of their use around a century later. These were battles with lots of pushing and shoving and smoke and noise, and you really didn't want to be in the wrong end of a pike formation.
Regent Murray's forces were arranged in two wings, one just on the edge of what is now Queen's Park, then Langside Hill, and probably extending further back to I think it was called Path Head. The other wing was in and around Langside village, and cavalry was available to go to any position that found itself under attack. And as I said earlier, artillery was fired from here, Langside Hill, towards Clincart Hill, and artillery was returned, fire was returned towards here. But when 2,000 Hamiltons made their way off Clincart Hill and advanced along the Lang Lone, well, the battle was well and truly on.
is possible that the Hamiltons couldn't see the right wing of Regent Murray's army from Clincart Hill and thought to make for Langside village and flank the visible left wing. So when 200 lead balls exploded in their direction from the hagbutters hidden in the gardens, it must have come as something of a surprise. Cavalry accompanying the foot soldiers scattered and pretty much left those on foot unsupported. At the same time, other things started happening elsewhere on the battlefield. The unsupported foot soldiers making up the body of the 2,000 Hamiltons then found themselves flanked and in the end retreated from the field. They were in fact chased. The battle only lasted around 45 minutes, the Hamiltons suffering most of the casualties. The battle was won by the experience of those under the command of Regent Moray, and lost due to the inexperience and perhaps ill health of the Earl of Argyll. Mary fled to England, where she was taken prisoner, detained at various locations around the country and, some 19 years later, executed by beheading. The axeman made a mess of the execution. It took 3 blows. After the first, Mary was heard to whisper, "Sweet Jesus."
There were many tragic events in Mary's short life. Deaths, murders, accusations, trumped up charges of treason. But I think in the end she was executed because Scottish Protestant nobility didn't want a Roman Catholic queen. And it may be of some interest to say here that up until 2013, just 8 years ago, members of the British royal family who hoped one day to take the throne were not allowed to marry a Roman Catholic.
Some say that the dead from the battle, numbering anywhere between 1 and 300, depending on which source you read, were dumped in a nearby bog. That bog is now the pond in Queen's Park. Wherever they lie, may they rest in peace.